All right, and then I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right, Michelle, can you give me a thumbs up if you see it?
Yes, I do see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so as we said before, this lecture is called Ask a Curator. It's going to be presented by both of us, so we're going to be going back and forth a little bit, sharing things from each of our collections.
Audrey, do you want to switch it quickly to just the slideshow version?
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
If you go up to the top, where it says
On this page?
slideshow, yeah, go up a little bit more. Yeah. And then from the beginning, yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So
great.
All right. So one of the things that we thought was important to go over and share with everyone is, how do we get things in our collections, both at the History Center and at the Elwood House? Because there is a process, and just because you see something that's old doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit for what we do, because we have to, even though for example, the History Center has an amazing new building, we can't accept everything, or else we'll be filled within the next 2 months, especially as people have been cleaning out during COVID. We've been getting lots of calls here. Do you want this? And I think every few months we get calls for Wurlitzer pianos or things like that. So we do have a collection committee, and they meet every 4 to 6 weeks. And there's just a variety of factors in that decision, but the main ones are, is there a connection to DeKalb County history? Can we take care of it? Because, if something's old and fragile, we don't have a huge budget for conservation. So if it's really in poor condition, we really have to think about, because when we accept something, we are taking on that we are committing to taking care and preserving these items in perpetuity. So there is, it's, although you may say it's, something from your junk drawer or something like that, there is a cost for us to be able to preserve these things. So again, we want to make sure that we're picking the best items to represent the different stories in DeKalb County's history. And then also, is it a duplicate of something we have already in the collection? So that goes anything from yearbooks, and which are, again, it's not always black and white. If you have a yearbook that has like all these memories and all these, handwritten notes in there, then that's a different piece of history than just a yearbook from 1942, when, there's nothing written in there at all. And we already have 2 copies in our collection, and the other ones that have already are in good condition. So that's, again, we can't care and take care of 10 of the same item. But that being said, if it is appropriate for us to be able to contact other museums and seeing if they're, interested in taking those items, especially if they're connected to DeKalb County history in general, we'll always try and work with the donor to find a good home.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Michelle is saying, at the Elwood House, we have almost the same sort of collections committee structure and a very similar set of criteria that we look for. But our mission is even a little bit smaller because the Elwood House is so directly tied to the Elwood family and the servants who worked at the Elwood House, the story of barbed wire. There are a lot of directions that we can go with that, but our storage space is so limited, and we really try to keep our collection really focused on the stories that are related to the Elwoods and barbed wire. So yeah, same thing. We get a lot of donations of a lot of really amazing things that we just can't take, but we always try to help you find a better home for them if possible. Okay, so in preparation for this lecture, Michelle and I put out a few polls through our social media. I think Michelle you guys did most of yours through Facebook, and we did ours through Instagram. So we put up a few prompts. I think we each had 3, and then had people vote on them and see which one they wanted us to answer. So the first poll was, which would you rather see, our earliest donation or our most recent donation? And the winner of that poll was our earliest donation. So that turns out to be this screen, which if you come on a tour of the Elwood House Museum today, you would see it in the back corner in the left side of the Elwood Mansion's living room. And so it's not something that you see up close very often. So I wanted to get a good picture here and do a close-up image so you can see the design that's on it. I don't know the exact year of this screen. I think it's important to differentiate the earliest donation from the oldest item. This is not the oldest piece that we have in the Elwood House Museum's collection, but it is the first thing that we have cataloged as a donation. And we know that, and I think this is a good way to talk about how we organize the museum's collection, because this screen was given the number X.1. Each object, when it comes into the collection, is assigned a number. And the number tells us a variety of things. The number is attached physically to the object. So whether that means tying it to the object with a string, sometimes we can use varnishes if the material allows for that and that won't damage it. We can use a varnish to attach a number to it. And that's just a way to always keep it tied to its records and its history so we can research it later. So today, our numbers no longer look like X.1 or X.2. Today, they have a 3-part system. So I have an example here of 2021.5.3, and that tells us a few things. So the first part, 2021, tells us that that object was donated in the year 2021, so this year. The second part, the 5, is the number of donations that was in the sequence. So that was the 5th thing donated, or the 5th donation from that year. So 2021 year was donated, 0.5, 5th donation that year, and the 0.3 at the end is the number in the sequence of objects that were donated together. So this one would be, there would be at least 3 objects that this person donated. So that is how we keep track of our objects today. After we bring the object into the museum, the collections committee votes on it and we decide to formally accept it. We do a lot of research on the object. We study it, we get an idea of the maker's marks that are on it and do some research on those, find out how old it is, make the connections that we need to the Elwood family and to our mission for the museum. We measure it, we photograph it, and then all of that information is put into our museum database, where we can use the assigned number to look all of that up in the future. So if we're putting together an exhibit and we need to find a journal, or we're looking for examples of servants, for example, we can search by keywords and search for servant or cook or laundress. And that will help to pull up that information without having to physically look through, sheets of every item that's in the museum's collection. So at the bottom of this slide, I've listed some of the information that you can find in that database, but I also wanted to just give you a picture, an example of what that database looks like. So this specific entry is not for the screen. This one is for a postcard that was donated last year. This one has the number that you can see. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but okay, great. So the object ID is 2020.13. So we know this object was donated last year, and it was the 13th donation of the year. The description contains a lot of information about what is on the postcard. This one happens to be blank, except for some maker's marks. So that tells us who published this postcard and maybe the photographer who took the picture. And then we're also able to do some research, and we found out that based on the way the back of the postcard is divided, that tells us some things about the year. So we gave this a date of about 1907 based on the style of the back of this postcard. So then there's some other information on different pages here, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what that system looks like and how we organize our collection. Oh, do you have anything you want to add to that section, Michelle? Oh, you're muted.
There you go. Yep. No, we also use Past Perfect, and most of the historical societies throughout DeKalb County also use them. It's a program that's designed for smaller to mid-size museums. So it's nice that there's this nice database that across the board most organizations use. And then a little bit later on, I'll show you our online version. So you can actually go and on your own kind of see what materials the History Center has online.
Yeah, that's a really great resource. Okay, so our next question that we asked through social media was, would you rather see examples of cats or dogs from the collection? And dogs won in a landslide, which is a great thing for my research, because when I used our past perfect system and looked up the keyword cat, it brought up 9 results. And when I brought up dog, it had 76. So the dogs are much more popular in our collection as well. So I just pulled together a few examples of dogs in our collection. This first one is a Staffordshire figurine. Staffordshire was an inexpensive type of souvenir pottery that came from Staffordshire, England. But through the years, it has become a really popular collector's item. And Perry Elwood was a big collector. So this piece was collected by him, then passed down to his daughter, Patty. I have a couple pictures of them. So there's Perry. There's his daughter, Patty. She donated this piece back to the museum in 1980. So we have the number there. You're getting a real practice with our museum number. So 1980 was the year it was donated. It was the first donation of that year, and there were at least 2 objects. This is the second object in that donation. All right, next I have a photograph. This one, Patty is in this one too. She's this little girl sitting in the wagon right at the front. And then her brother, Ayel, is behind her. And then I think that is one of their cousins. And this dog, I don't know the dog's name, but he or she appears in our collection over and over again. She was a beloved family pet. It's so cute. And I think that's May Elwood standing in the background. So they had this little wagon outfitted for the dog to take the kids around. And I don't know how much the dog enjoyed it, but the kids look like they are.
That's awesome.
And I would think this would be, probably about 1911, I would think. All right, go ahead.
So we also asked the same question on social media and had the same result, overwhelmingly dog people. So I also, pulled a few pieces in the collection to show off. So this is a warming dish that was used by a family in Sycamore, and it actually has a cat and a dog on it. It's a little hard to tell, but yeah, this is a little bow on the dog here. But this was it was on display in an exhibit that we had a couple of years ago, and just a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's in a museum. I had that when I was growing up. And it's like, yep, things don't have to be 150 years old to be part of the museum collection. And the fact that it represents everyday life is also another reason that I picked these 2 things, because they're a lot of times people think of just things for special occasions that will be in a museum, but most of us leave pretty ordinary lives, and just this was a part of someone's daily life for a very long time. If this was what their baby food, for a couple of years probably, that they use this, and other siblings might have used this. And then we have the cat right here with the game of Old Maid, and you've got that, and the cards with this game are also quite entertaining. So that was what came up when I did the search in our collection. We had 10 items with cats and 68 with dogs. So for the next picture, this is a photograph here that came up in a scrapbook of someone. It was a woman during World War II, and I believe here she is in the Philippines. So this is one of the camps where she was at, and you can just tell this dog is just so skinny. So it's, again, these pictures, you think, one thing, and then you just start asking a lot more questions and wanting to know more, of the story here. And that's really, I would say one of the favorite parts of, being, a curator is you get what you do, you get to ask those questions and see if you can find more, do some research and find answers. And then the next picture. And these are a little bit more lighthearted. So these are more promotional pieces. So we have the Wetzel brothers that have this calendar here from 1931. And you can see a cute little dog there. And then this is a booklet from Leader Oil Company. And this was one of the earlier pieces. So you can also see that this was accessioned in 2006. Looks like that was smeared a little bit, but it was the 65th item, and there were 15 pieces in that collection. Usually, you know what, actually, I think this is a deck of cards. If you can see this top part up here. And I'm not sure what's on the other side. Normally when we take pictures, we'll take both sides. I didn't look at it that closely, but we try to put the accession number in a spot where you can find it, but it's not easy to see. So that's something definitely that as our organization has gotten more professional, and because we usually are dependent on volunteers that are very well trained to help us take care of the collection. So normally, like, you can't see it on the front of this one, but you can see it here. So we try and put it in a spot that's not too conspicuous.
Yeah, and I mean, both of our organizations have been around for quite some time, and the museum field has developed a lot in that time too. So when the Elwood House started, it was run by volunteers, and they didn't have formal training, but they did their best, which we're so grateful for. But then the common way to mark items was to use red nail polish, and that now we know is not a great idea, but they were doing their best, and those numbers are still visible. So some pluses and minuses, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We definitely can find information on this, and that's really what's so important, is that we know the story of these items, because if these are just pieces in our collection without that information, you just lose a lot. So we have, who donated it, when they donated it, how they got it. So again, when someone donates stuff, there's not just a drop and run. We like to ask questions, and why was this saved for 100 years in your junk drawer, or is this a hand-me-down because your family owned the business, or again, lots of different questions that are part of that process, and when something becomes part of the collection.
Right.
All right. So here are the last two pieces on dogs. So we do have a dog tag from Sycamore in 1935. This was dog tag number 9. And there was a tax for the dogs. So that was, instead of just doing it for, in case the dog runs away, it was very clearly a tax here that they were trying to get some money from dog owners. And then this picture right here, this was from the Bangs Plumbing business. It was on Salmonock Street, and it's a couple neat things in this photo. So there's the white dog that's in the front. There's a water fountain there, and we actually a few years ago received a water fountain from the city of Sycamore, and I asked, you guys have any pictures? And they're like, no. And then we were able to find this one in the collection because we did that search for water fountains, and I wasn't really expecting anything. But then we also have a model of this that somebody made of this local business. So it's, it's got a dog, but again, lots of other fun stories that go along with the photo.
Oh, these ones go back to the Elwood House Museum. So these are a couple of carriage robes. One with a cat. I couldn't resist throwing a cat in there too. And another one with a dog. We've got a handful of these carriage robes. They would be used when people drove around in carriages to keep your lap warm. It's just a little blanket. A lot of times they're made of fur. And quite a few in the collection have these animal designs, which I think are just so charming, so cute. I love that cat one. So these, again, are from 1984 and 1993. Those numbers have nothing to do with the year that the object was created. It's just the year that they were donated to the museum.
So another question that we asked was, do you want to learn more about local businesses or sports? And businesses actually won, but I did want to showcase a few sports pictures just for those people that voted for sports, and take the opportunity to talk a little bit about caring for photos. And this is something that Audrey is going to talk about a little bit, but even, at your your own personal collection, not just something, that it's up to museum standards, but there's some, simple steps that you can take with your own photos or personal heirlooms that you have, to help them last a little bit longer. So in this, you can see in the corners, it looks like there's some thumbtack marks and a piece of Scotch tape there. Things happen, people use photos, and that's part of the story. I was thinking the Velveteen Rabbit, it's in bad shape because it's been loved so much. So, that's okay. But the best way to preserve that is you can just put it in a plastic sleeve. You can get those at Office Max. You just want to make sure that they say archivally safe. There are plastics that are friendly and some that aren't friendly. There's materials that off gas that increase the deterioration of items. So if you think about the inside of your car and how you have to, occasionally clean off the inside of your windshield, because that's off-gassing of the plastics in our car. And so with the photos, if you're going to put them in plastic, you just want to make sure that it says archivally safe and you'll be good to go. Stay away from any tape, any and writing in pen, depending on what the material is made of. Pencil is usually the first choice, and you want to make sure that the philosophy in museum work now is whatever you do, make sure it's reversible. So pencil obviously is a lot easier to take away than pen is. If you want to take it to the next picture, I'm going to kind of go back and forth here a little bit. So this one is obviously, it's newer than 2013. It's in much better shape, but none of the people in this photo are identified. So again, that we know who gave it to us. We could do, some more research and maybe find out who these women were. This was part of the American Girls Professional Baseball League. In 2013, they had a reunion. So again, we could find out, but it's a whole lot easier when someone like in the previous picture, you want to go back, all of those people are named there. So that definitely makes it easier when someone's doing genealogy to say, yep, we have this great picture, and they had no idea that anyone in their family, one worked at Anaconda, and number two played baseball, and three, that they were really good because they were the regional champions. They traveled to Kansas to go for this baseball game. So, there are Pigma pens, which are archivally safe pens that you, with a little work, can be reversible. So that's what we encourage people to do. If it's a picture that you really love, but it's older, today the technology is so simple where you can just scan and print it, and then you can have that version, the copy, where you can enjoy it, and then you can preserve the original to just make it last a little bit longer. That's it for the photos. Then on to businesses. So like Audrey, when I did, a search on how many businesses do we have? Here I looked on our personal, so the database Past Perfect, there were 721 hits there. But we also on our website have online resources. And when I did the search for business, I came up with 169. And that's just, I just want to make people aware that as far as we've made amazing strides in making resources available online, but it's still just the tip of the iceberg in what any archival depository has in their collection. So please don't stop by, oh, they say they have online archival material, and then you find two things and think you're done. Most organizations, they get what they can to put online, but it's an ongoing process, and it's going to take years to even, get, like, as I said here, there's 721 hits and there's only, 169. We tried to put the ones that are in good condition, that maybe people are the most interested in. And if we have, like 20 of something that's really similar, we'll just pick one. But I did, Audrey, if you want to let me share the screen now, I'll go ahead and kind of walk through what it looks like to do this research online.
Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
And then you should be able to, right?
Yep. Can everyone see online resources?
Yes.
So if you just go to DeKalbCountyHistory.org, under research and collections, there's a button for online resources, and it'll take you right here to view our online collection. And then you're given a bunch of different choices, maybe. As sound Audrey, my internet connection recently has been a little unstable. So far so good, but it's being a little slow here and pulling this up. Here we go. So it lets you, there's a wide variety of options to start with. You can just do a keyword search is what I tend to do. But you can also, if you're just wanting to see what things are, you can hit random images. You can also search. So these are just some random things that pop up that are different every time. So those are just kind of fun to see, you know, what's going to get pulled up. So we've got everything from, this is a dress from the DeKalb, the city of DeKalb's centennial. Somebody made these, it's a woman's dress, a daughter's dress, and they had a doll, to a cultivator, to a purse from the 1930s. But I'm going to go back here, and you can also look at things through archives only, photos only, libraries, and then objects. But if you put in keyword, and then it depends also what you're looking for. So you could also just search for items with images, because sometimes not everything has an image. So I'll go ahead and put in business. And so here, oh good, we still got 169 results. And then also kind of, you know, what Audrey was talking about, you know, we have to photograph everything. And then here's just some more information. There's categories here, so you can do that keyword search, the description of the item here, catalog number. So again, that same series of numbers that Audrey was talking about. And then again, some more search terms, but you know, you can do a closer look here. And a lot of times we get people like, oh, I'm interested in just a historic picture of downtown as a gift for someone. Do you have any? And I'm like, yeah, we have a lot. But go to the website, look through here, and then we can also work with you and get copies if you want to have something printed. We do have, there's a watermark that does show up if you try to print these from home. So that's just to make sure that people that are using it are either just using it for personal use, and if you're doing it for a business, there's you know, a charge that goes along with that, and then we just ask that people acknowledge that they got it from our collection. So there is that. I'll turn it back over to you.
Let's see. Okay, back where we left off. Okay. Yeah, let's go back here. So our last question was, would you rather learn about a hidden treasure from the museum's collection, something that's not on display that we really love, or a most asked about object? And what was chosen was a hidden treasure. So the one that I chose is one of my personal favorite objects, which if you are familiar with the museum's social media, you might have seen this object before, but I just love this one so much. It's one of my favorites. It's this book called The Ghosts of My Friends. This book was given to May Elwood in 1909, May 8th, so almost to the day, right? Yeah. In
How fun.
1909. Yeah, that's fun. When she was in Highland Park, Illinois, the log house. This, I believe, is the house that she went to when she was going to have her children to give birth. She went to another house away from the Elwood house. It was given to her by her nephews, Bruce and Henry. And this book, it was donated in 2004, but it contains all of these signatures that were written with a dip pen, and so the ink would run. So the person would sign on it vertically and then fold the paper in half, and then the ink would make a perfect symmetrical shape on both sides, and it created these ghostly looking images. So this one was done by May's father, H.B. Gurler, who was a very successful dairyman in DeKalb, so he has his own historical connections in the county. But you can see what happened to his signature after he wrote it. And this book is just full of these signatures from her friends and family members. So I wanted to also talk about caring for these different materials. So books obviously have a very different makeup than a carriage robe, for example, that's made prefer. So when we are going to store things from the museum's collection, we have a lot of things that we consider. Are pests likely to eat or try to live in this object? How do we need to store it to keep it safe from those conditions? What temperatures does it need to be stable? Does it need to be kept in cold temperatures? Will cold crack a finish on it? Can it not get too hot? At what point would it melt? For example, like could we put it on display in a room where the sun was always shining in? If it would melt, then no. Is it light sensitive? Most objects we keep out of direct sunlight because the colors will fade over time or the structure will be damaged. And we also, I mean, just like you do at home, we have to weigh the value of display versus the value of preservation. So if we can share this object with more people by having it on display and starting conversations that way and fulfilling the mission of the museum by sharing this history, is that more important than doing small incremental damage over time? Or is it in such poor condition and such a valuable item to our collection that we want to put it in storage and only bring it out for special occasions? So that's something that we're always weighing as we work with collections objects. And then some on-site storage options. We have our photos stored in boxes. Most of them are in those sleeves that Michelle was talking about that protect them from getting too close together. Sometimes photos will stick together if they're in too much humidity. Smaller objects are wrapped in tissue paper and boxed separately, and then they're kept in a separate storage location. And then in the Elwood Mansion, we have a couple of storage rooms that are air conditioned that contain our textiles and furniture. So those ones, we have temperature and humidity monitors in those rooms, and we check those weekly to make sure that the temperature is not shifting too much over time. So there are some industry standards for temperature and humidity and how much it should fluctuate through the seasons. And we try to keep an eye on those and make sure, you know, if it's getting too humid, we put in the dehumidifier. And if it's getting, it's not humid enough, then we bring in the humidifier. So it's always a battle with the elements.
Yeah, one thing that we always like to tell people too, like as you're starting to, at home, like if you're comfortable, those items are going to be comfortable. So, most of us don't want to hang out in our attics in the summer, so even though it's extra space that you may have, that's probably not the best spot to keep things.
Yeah, so carrying that over to, your own materials at home, consider the places that you have for storage. You don't necessarily need to go out and rent a, climate controlled storage space. But if you have places like the basement, some great things about that would be low light levels, but you'd have to make sure that the pieces aren't in danger of flood damage, or they might be too humid in a basement. Closets are usually great spots for collections or, antique storage because it's kept at a stable temperature. And like Michelle was saying, it's the same temperature you're comfortable in. So that's usually great. But it might not be enough space for a lot of your objects. Storage units, garages, and sheds, those usually don't have a lot of environmental control. And they also are not something that you interact with very often. So you might forget something that you have out there that shouldn't be there in all seasons. And they do some good things about them, where they have a larger amount of space and also low light. And then display. You do want to look at and enjoy these pieces. I think of things like quilts that were handed down through my family. And those, they weren't meant to be in boxes for generations and generations. So you have to, in your own household, weigh what's the value, what's the joy that I will get out of seeing this every day versus the damage that it might get from daily wear and tear. So maybe a quilt, you might not want to put it on a bed where it will be used every day, but you could maybe display it on the wall and make sure it's not facing a window where it gets direct sunlight. So just things like that to consider. Oh, and then with this last section, I wanted to talk about how we interpret objects from our collection. So things like Ghosts of My Friends, that collection of autographs that have been turned into the shapes. We have been able to use those in a few different ways for kids programs and, talking to adults. And when we're deciding how we want to use a historical object for a program or a talk, we think about how we can use our senses to explore this object. Can we let people touch it and feel it? Is it something that you would smell if it was being used? If we're talking about something that was used in a kitchen, what would the experience of using that have been like? We talk about what the historical context it was used in was like. Why was this object used by this family instead of something else that was used by maybe a wealthier family? Or in the case of the Elwoods, who were very wealthy, what would someone who was at a lower income be using instead? And then how can we connect this object to our lives today? Something we're always striving for is making connections with life in 2021 or whatever year it is. And when we're planning programs, we have to think, how would this adult connection be different than the ones a child would make? So it's creating a well-rounded picture and taking into account that every person is not one experience. Their life is made up of so many different experiences, and they contribute things to that program or that story that you may never have. So leaving room for different interpretations. And are there activities or conversations we can connect to this object? So with Ghosts of My Friends, maybe we would have children recreate that book, or even adults. Like, it'd be fun for anybody to make their own signature book. Yeah, different things like that. So interpreting your own family heirlooms. I gave the example of a quilt earlier, so we'll come back to that one. So is it in good enough condition to be used? What is the historical significance of that pattern? Quilts are something that have been very, very well researched. So often you can find how old the pattern is, if it was a regional pattern, things like that. What materials were used in it. A lot of times clothing scraps would be made into quilts, or feed bags during the Great Depression especially were made into quilts and clothing. So you can think about, where would they have gotten these materials? Do I still use these materials? Is it hand stitched or by machine? Would learning those skills help you feel a connection to the past? Yeah, there are a lot of connections. Recreating or retracing the steps that your ancestors took to do a certain activity or to make an object or to use an object can really help you feel connected to the past. And then another example, if you have a mixing bowl, do you have any recipes handed down by the same person who used the bowl? Can you look up recipes from the time period that was used? What materials is the bowl made of? Is it made to be microwave or oven safe? And how do those materials show the intended use and the time period? So you can enjoy looking at an object, but there are also, you take a little time to investigate the different parts, and you can create a really well-rounded, super interesting experience.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Audrey was saying, I think that's one of my favorite parts of working with the collection is just those different stories and different perspectives. So we started this off today by looking at this chair, and when we had it on in an exhibit, I would show the kids, and I'm like, so who thinks this is important at all? And they're like, that's just a boring old chair that, I wouldn't even buy in a garage sale, And this is the oldest piece that we have at the History Center. It dates from the 1830s. It was from what was called the Coltonville Chair Factory, although again, change over time. Their definition of a factory was, a shop where you made things by hand. I mean, it wasn't, these massive production things that we think of today. And if you look closely at the chair, you can see that the legs, there was whittling, involved in that. The seat was definitely a replacement of the original seat. But again, it goes back to these questions of, okay, so you're moving here from, most of the settlers came from out east. You could only pack so much stuff in your covered wagon. Most of it was going to be food because there was going to be no places to stop and eat for, again, the 2.5, 3 weeks that would, if you were lucky to get out here, you would bring maybe one piece of furniture to, to put in your log cabin that you were going to have to build. And apparently chairs were something people were willing to either pay or barter for, that they did have a business here that was in business for several years. So by just looking at this chair, you don't really get a clue to what the exciting story is, or just how it connects to the early days of our county. And but when you tell someone, you know, I've got this amazing story to go along with it, all of a sudden it takes on this like new, very new perspective. Go ahead. So we also asked the question, would people be interested in learning about more women's or men's clothing? And women's won overwhelmingly. So here we have, again, I showed this on the online website, but that the Centennial dress from DeKalb. There's a wedding dress, is that second piece that was worn for a couple generations. And the men's clothing that we have there is, this is interesting because we have, as you can see, we take photos of the textiles on mannequins, and some of the male mannequins, their waists are so small, they also don't fit on the mannequins that are from present day. So we know that, you know, women wearing the corsets and other things, that they're not necessarily always going to fit, but these pants here, it was very tall and very skinny. And so we were able to, we had to be a little creative in how we were able to take this picture of getting all the pieces together. And then the other piece is a World War II uniform. And these are one of the pieces that really don't take anymore, because we have such a significant number of pieces connected to World War II in the collection, just as you know, many of the people that served in the service have passed away, and the family doesn't know what to do with their uniforms. They just don't want to throw them away, but nobody in the family wants them. But we've kind of just met our capacity with that. You know, obviously there's always exceptions, but so that's one of the areas that we really don't collect too much of anymore. And the next picture. So I thought I would go ahead here and highlight one of the more beautiful pieces that we have in our collection. This is a wedding dress from the turn of the century, and just the photos that our volunteers were able to take here. Just again, it shows their dedication and passion for their work too. So this is the bottom of the skirt is the first picture, and the picture on the right side is of one of the sleeves, and just truly reflects just the attention to detail and just the beauty of this, and how it's amazing and what good condition it still is in. And then the next picture, and then I threw this in too. We didn't you know, ask people if they were interested in children's clothing, but my goodness, if anyone, you know, see children, they're not easy on their clothes. So that's certainly not a lot of things from children tend to make it to museums, because they're usually worn and passed down. And so the picture on the left is some undergarments from a young girl. She would be wearing that underneath her dress. The centerpiece is a piece from Marilyn's majorettes, and she had them, I think probably from like 5 and 6 year olds through high school, and amazing uniforms. And we have just a really great selection of some of those pieces, just because she held on to those uniforms. And then the piece on the right is a snowsuit, which is just so adorable. I just love it. And that was another recent donation from someone. And again, you know, it's just these stories and these glimpses into the past. And you know, I just feel honored and privileged that people trust us to take care of these heirlooms. And you know, we are dedicated to taking care of them, to finding them, putting them in a good home, and being able to share with people, you know, these items. And again, another, you know, perk of the internet is that we can share these pieces and not have them out constantly on display, because, you know, that was one of the issues that Audrey raised was, you know, are we of weighing that, is it more important to preserve the item, or is it more important to put it on display? And textiles are really tricky, even if you have limited light. The recommendation currently, or at least last time I checked for textiles was a maximum of 3 months, just because of the potential light damage, even if you don't have the lights on all the time, that these pieces are just really fragile. So being able to take pictures and share them in venues like this, we can certainly do both. We can share the pieces and the stories and still do a good job of taking care of the items. So I think that ends our slides here. So we can open it up to see if people have any other questions. And you can just unmute yourself too if you wanted to ask a question.
Oh, we did have one question. Oh, I almost completely forgot. We had one question that was submitted via before the lecture. So that was, what is the best thing you have discovered in your curatorial work so far? And I've had a little time to think about this, so I'll go ahead and answer this one first. And it's not an object necessarily, although there are so many amazing objects in the museum's collection. The thing that came to mind when I was thinking about this question was research. And one of the things that has been the most useful in researching all sorts of things is using census records. And I think this is a perfect thing to talk about in this lecture because census records are public information. It's not something that you can only use if you're a museum professional, but it tells us things like we can trace back where a person was living every 10 years and trace what they were doing, what their occupation was, who they were married to, their children. We can watch their family grow through time, and we can also see where they lived. And it's kind of creepy, but it's also a long time ago. So we can go back and we can take the address and we can see, is that house from the 1850s still standing? Or has it become a shopping center? Just tracing that history through time through these written documents is so interesting. And I would definitely recommend it if you are interested in your own genealogy. I'm sure a lot of you have probably done some genealogical work and probably worked with census records, but super interesting.
Yeah, and I would agree 100%. There's just, at its surface, you think it's one thing, but when you come up against different questions, you're like, oh, wait, that could be in the census too. So for example, if someone is looking on history of their home, we can go and look at the census record, see who lived there. And so we may have a picture of a family in front of a house, but we didn't know the address, but we have the family's name and we were able to figure out their address. So we can maybe find a picture of, the house going around it, in that backwards way. We also, I mentioned when we first started, have our Arts in Action exhibit, and that project was just getting off the ground here in January. And we do have some volunteers that are going through census records to help us get a better understanding of Black and Latino history in DeKalb County. And we have a volunteer that's going through all the census records. She's through 1910. And we are learning amazing, information each time she sends me an email that there was a significant Black population in different parts of DeKalb County. And so now we're going to see, were they still there in the 1920s? And if not, why? And where did they go? And so they are a great resource. But like I mentioned before too, sometimes we go looking for one answer and we get the answer, but then we have 10 more questions. So I think that's also, just the joy of those census records is that they can tell us so many different things. And they're also ask such great questions. There's like, did you have indoor plumbing? So you can even just get a sense of that in your community. Okay, so I think 1 year too, they asked if you had a telephone in your house. So it's just kind of that, like, just how were we keeping up with, the rest of the nation and some of this technology, or were we kind of behind, or, so again, I wish I could play that stuff all day long.
We have another question in the chat that is, what's the biggest misconception about curators? It's a good question.
Oh, well, I guess one thing I would say is usually, especially when I'm talking to either students that are interested in getting in the field or even working with volunteers, that I say, there's behind the scenes and there's in the trenches and the front lines. And so I think a lot of times people think of on the front lines, you're the educators, you're working with the kids and you want to touch everything. And that the curators are usually more introverted and they're like, no, don't touch anything. We've got to save it. And that's not always the case. They're working so hard to save and protect these things. They want people to know about it. Then kind of what's the point then, if you're just going to keep it all to yourself, that's really not very helpful. So I would just say that curators are a little more outgoing than maybe people would sometimes think.
I would also add that a curator at every museum means a different thing. I think the image of a curator is, a person who is a complete expert on a topic and can tell you everything. They're a walking encyclopedia, and they work with the collection and they put together exhibits. And yes, we do a lot of that stuff. But at a small organization like the DeKalb County History Center or the Elwood House Museum, you are also doing 5 other jobs. So you might not be a walking encyclopedia about everything. I mean, I certainly know a lot more about barbed wire than I would have ever dreamt 5 years ago. But we're also sort of jacks of all trades. And a lot of times the people who visit the museum can tell us more about a topic than we already knew. So.
And we appreciate that. Absolutely. I mean, we get stories of families out here because we're a former farmstead. And so people are like, oh, my grandfather lived here. I'm like, tell me, what, we're always wanting, I think curiosity is definitely something that you can describe with all curators. But one other piece I wanted to let people know is that we love to share our information. So please, if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We're always happy to help. And we also don't want people to feel bad. Like if you find something and it's like, oh my gosh, it just went against everything that you told me. This is terrible. It's like, it's okay. We're all doing the best we can. Believe me. I have things at home that I know should be better. One thing I meant to talk about, like when I was showing the wedding dresses, don't get your wedding dress cleaned at the dry cleaners. Like you want to stay away from chemicals and things like that. And there's archival boxes and there's those little things that you get, in your shoes or your purse just to control humidity. You can buy those and have those in, your wedding dresses or those family quilts or different things like that. So if you have a question, we're happy to help. Don't feel bad. Believe me, they used to print old newspapers as they're highly acidic and they're made to be disposed of. They would basically put like Pepto-Bismol on some papers to get that acid out. Well, that wasn't helpful either. The papers just turned pink. So, it's just like everything else in life, things change. We learn a little bit more every day. So we all do just the best we can with the information we have at the time. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out either as an organization, as an individual, or to encourage a family member to give us a call as well. The last thing I want to say too is keep in mind, your local historical society. If you have a piece in your family too, like that baptismal gown that people are fighting over, because that we've had a couple times where there's been something that several people in the family want, and it's really causing some hard feelings. And I always say, well, you can donate it here and we'll take care of it and you can come and visit whatever you want. So that has been a solution for a couple different families. So you can keep that in mind too.
All right. Are there any last minute questions? You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question or drop it in the chat, but I think that's going to wrap us up for today. So we'll hang out a few minutes longer. And if you have any questions about maybe something specific that you have and you're wondering how to store it, or if you're thinking about donating something and want to know if it would go to one of our museums, feel free to pipe in. But thank you so much for coming today. Like Michelle said at the beginning, our next lecture is on June 2nd. Third. I was so close. So you can keep an eye out on our social media pages and in the newspaper for our press release about that. And we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you for the clapping. We miss seeing you all in person. So thank you for joining us on Zoom. Oh, more claps. Yay.